I'm going to give you a little preview of my upcoming course there at danjohnuniversity.com. The course is going to be called The Art of Coaching. And basically, coaching is broken up into three parts. What you know, what you do, and the best phrase I've ever heard for part three is savoir-faire. That's that ability to change instantly if something comes up, a national tragedy, a local tragedy, a slippery field, forgetting your uniform. Savoir-faire is the ability to adapt to any circumstance. When you get to what we know, most people are pretty good about that. But it's how you apply it, that middle one, that's the most difficult. And in this first introductory lecture, I want to get to what I consider one of the biggest problems we have in the field of certainly strength and conditioning, but also in all coaching. And to be honest with you folks, it's life. And this little quick topic is called Don't Be Binary. And it comes up with those questions of like either or. And that's always an issue because it's a very low level of thinking. Now, there's nothing wrong with low levels of thinking, but life isn't always that simple. So this first introductory topic is called Don't Be Binary, Proactive Thinking for Coaching. I get questions like this all the time. Is this a good diet? Well, I mean, if you've read a book like The Road and you're living on scraps, yeah, that's all you have. Well, that's the best you're going to do, so that's a good diet. But to give me a good or bad or evil or good question about diet's very difficult. Is this a good food? That comes up all the time. This isn't moral theology. People ask me the question all the time, what's better? And then fill in these two things. Well, I hate to say the answer is it depends because there's more depth than that. This question comes up at workshops all the time. If you could only do one exercise the rest of your life, and I just want to pull my hair out, what kind of world would we live in if we were required by what some guy in a black uniform with red stripes shows up and says, you can only do one exercise, No, that just doesn't exist. And then, of course, this one, what is the single best thing to do with a kettlebell or single best thing to do with a barbell? These are either or questions. These are binary questions. The next one, will this make me a world champion? Will this make me fat? Will this make me ripped? Don't know. And of course, one of my favorite questions is, just give me a program and diet, and I'll do whatever you say. And the truth is, folks, there are no perfect diets. There are no perfect programs. It's what you do and the time you spend. And of course, a personal one here. I had a girlfriend one time say to me, if you don't drive up to Vacaville tonight, you don't love me. At the time, I was too stupid to realize that driving 2 hours at 2 a.m. in the morning in a Pacific rainstorm on a motorcycle was a bad idea. When I got to Vacaville, I knocked on her sister's door and my girlfriend had been passed out drunk for 5 hours. That's a nice lesson. Oh, and footnote, the relationship didn't last much after that. That's all either or thinking. That's all either or thinking, and that's not a good place to be in life. So I get kind of made fun of online that I say it depends too much. In fact, I've pointed out before that there's someone in Australia who said he was going to punch me in the mouth next time I said it depends. Well, when I went to Australia, he never showed up, and I said it depends constantly while I was there. I was asked years ago about the book by Covert Bailey, Fit or Fat. And this is the first time I can clearly remember kind of pulling back and saying, well, that's just not true. So this is the first quadrant I ever put together in my mind. Now, according to Covert Bailey, fit, of course, in fitness, in my definition, is the ability to do a task. But he had this concept of fit and not fat. And that would be his ideal world. But is that true? Is it possible to be fit and fat. If you're an offensive lineman in the NFL and you're carrying around 50, 60 pounds of extra fat, now maybe it's not healthy and maybe it won't lead to longevity, but for the money you're being paid, that poor defensive lineman has to bench press through you for 60 minutes, all that girth. If you're a sumo wrestler, you need some girth there too. A hand went up when I pointed this out one time. And what's interesting about that hand is the person said, well, there's this Russian guy who's dominating sumo wrestling right now, and he's lean. And I said to the person, you've just proved my point, that there is not a fit or fat. You've already given us options. And of course, there are times you can be not fit and not fat. We call that skinny fat. That comes from Josh Hillis's great blog, where he shows us people who look very good in clothes, but very bad on the beach, so to speak. They look good in clothes, but they don't look when they're exposed. And of course, there's one other option here, is to be fat and not fit. And the example I use here is, I went on a vacation not long ago to Las Vegas. And I always joke to people, if you're really feeling bad about yourself, go to Las Vegas and sit in a chair and watch humanity. I was going to say walk by, but waddle by is often just as true. There are other options besides fit or fat. And this course then came up when I was first lecturing on tension, the importance of tension. In my quadrant 4, which we'll get to at another time, that would be powerlifting and basically the 100 meters, and you could say Olympic lifting. There is a role of tension in these sports. If you're deadlifting, you want absolute tension, and that'll allow you to win. But if you run the 100 meters, you need to control that tension. You need to relax. So to win in the 100 meters, you want to relax. To win in the deadlift, you want tension. And when I started working on this idea, it began to flow into every aspect of what I do. It's nothing new. Dave Davis, of course, talked about the same thing. In this particular article in Track Technique in March and June 1974, when I was a high school junior, completely changed the way I trained myself. He went and talked to the greatest shot putters in the world at this time. And by the way, it's still a who's who in our field. And what he discovered was that it wasn't that shot putters either power lifted or Olympic lifted, but shot putters combine the power lifts and the Olympic lifts. All these decades later, that's still the best advice I've ever heard for how you train. It's not for a track athlete this or that. It's the skill set in incorporating these two different concepts. Now, this is nothing new. For those of you who have ever followed this idea of the Eisenhower box, you will notice that this is from when I was born. And it's a way to look at it. Now, if you read the work of Stephen Covey, he uses this box quite a bit. He separates tasks into two parts. Urgent, important. Is something urgent or not urgent? Is something important or not important? And you know what? Let's look right away to the one that most people miss. Something that's not urgent and it's not important. Once I started thinking about this at my old administrative job, I just decided to eliminate all those tasks. If it wasn't important and it wasn't urgent, why am I even doing it? Now, there are other tasks that are urgent and important. To me, urgent and important was the little bell that went off in my head. My goal was to take all those tasks that were urgent, right? Has to be done quickly, and important. For example, I'll tell you a quick one. If your daughter throws up on you, you now have an urgent and important task to deal with your child and clear up the vomit. I tried the best I could to slide all these urgent tasks that were important over to important and not urgent. And I did that through checklists. So I was always ahead of the game. I was always working on those forms, that paperwork, well before it was due. So I never felt like anything was that urgent. And of course, the last one, if it's urgent and not important, let somebody else do it. Again, this is how Eisenhower boxed his tasks up. And what we should really spend our time with is getting ourselves, I think, over into this important and not urgent. Having said that, I ran from here into one of my favorite exercises of all time, what we call the goal setting exercise for people with lofty goals. Now, I took this from the work of Tony Robbins, but very simply, and this is something I want you to think about, is do means you get your goal. Don't means you don't get your goal. Pain is the pain you will get from either getting your goal. Wait, there's pain in getting your goals? Yes. Or the pain in not getting your goals. And then the other one is this, the pleasure of achieving your goal and the pleasure of not achieving your goal. This was a great game changer for me as a coach, because by setting this quadrant up, one of the first things we found out with elite athletes was this. They never thought of two things usually. They really didn't think about how much pleasure they would get if they got their goal. One of my athletes once said, and he filled in that box with, "It would be great." That was it. But boy, this athlete sure had a lot of stuff filled in on the box said the pain of not getting the goal. And that's when I realized with this particular athlete, I needed to focus on, well, obviously letting them know there's going to be a lot of pleasure in getting their goals, but I used the lever of the pain to make this athlete work harder. Folks, this is quadrant thinking. This is not binary thinking. There is a place, as we'll go through in the lecture, there is a place for binary thinking when you're assessing. And basically, you're trying to get yourself into a little matrix. If yes, then. If yes, then. If yes, then. And at the end of that, do this. If yes, then, and you get to the box, now we do this. But binary thinking by itself is a very, very low level of thinking. This is just a preview of this lecture. There's a lot more to go on this lecture, and there's a lot more boxes for you and I to fill in. This is going to be part of the Dan John University, and we're going to have a total of 10 different modules. This is one of the first modules. So not only is a lot more in this lecture, but there's a whole bunch more to this whole course.